Hey guys, Dirt here with another episode of The Remainder. Now, what is The Remainder again? This is the show that talks about some of the books that have come out the last couple weeks that you probably missed, and they're worth reading. So when you go to pick up your new books today, here are some books to just throw onto your pile. You're going to have a few extra bucks, I'm sure. So this is the remainder of the books you should be picking up. Now, the first thing is that DC Comics was nice enough to send us a review copy of DV8. Let's see, where are we at? Here we are. DV8, Gods and Monsters, #1. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the series, DV8 originally started as a book that was pretty much about, unlikable heroes that are pretty much selfish and greedy. And so what happens in this new series is Brian Wood picks up the characters, he resurrects the title, to bring us a story about superheroes that fall onto an alien planet that's much like a primitive version of Earth. And well, what happens when primitives see people with superpowers? Well, they're treated like gods and monsters. And so what we have here is a story that if you've never read any of the DV8 books before, this is, it doesn't matter. This is a new story. It's a new take, basically, on the idea. And so if you're not familiar with any of the characters, it's not going to make any difference. And what you have here is really a pretty neat story that kind of makes you look at the different shades of gray on how good and bad you can be with using your influence and power. So for those of you who want to check something out that's a little bit different and, it's a different take on the idea of superheroes, again, this is a great jumping on point. You've never read the title before. It's not going to make any sort of difference because this is actually a pretty neat story about the corruption of power and, things that go along that line. All right, now let's talk about American Vampire #2. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this is the Vertigo book with the Stephen King name on it. And if that's enough to sell you on it, great. But for the rest of you wondering if it's, any good or what it even means, American Vampire, well, then here's the basic idea. American Vampire is about vampires in America. All right, there we go. What, you want more? All right. The idea is that vampirism is like a virus. And as it moves from person to person, from place to place, it mutates a little bit. And as the old European goth, Vlad the Impaler type vampires come to the U.S. in the early 1920s and get into, the Old West and the railroads and the industrialization, as they're moving into these new areas and infecting new people, the people who are infected are becoming different types of vampires, and thus American vampires. So really what you have here is this idea of the old giving way to the new. And that old style of vampire, personally, I'm not into vampires, I'm not into Twilight, I'm not into any of that. If you are, great, whatever. But the idea is taking those classic ideas from basically Stoker's original novel of what it means to be a vampire and tweaking it and playing with it and showing how it can kind of change with different people and different types of infections. So it really is interesting, and plus being set in the 1920s makes for just an interesting time period, just an interesting era in which to see people act and react and how things are going to be different, how they can get away with a little bit more, because today there's a vampire outbreak, it's going to be all over the news and whatnot, whereas there they can, kind of play with the news a little bit more, isolate people a little bit more. So it really is kind of an interesting take, and so well worth checking out. And again, that's issue #2. You can still find issue #1 on most store shelves, so go ahead and grab issue 1 and issue 2 and add it to your pull list, because I think you'll like it. Now, moving on to some more classic comic book titles, we have some of the new Marvel space books here. We've got Nova number, 36, and Guardians of the Galaxy 25. Now, the reason why I'm throwing these books into the mix is because they're both setups for the Thanos Imperative, which is coming. Thanos Imperative, right. Thanos Imperative is going to be your story for the summer in the Marvel space books, and Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning are really great at telling these epic stories. They're really great with using these characters in outer space, and a lot of times they're thought of as fringe characters. A lot of people, they're going to see a book like Nova and they're like, oh yeah, I think that guy showed up in Spider-Man and he may have been in some team book with a bunch of other teams, but they don't really follow Nova. Both of these books are set up not only as introductions to the Thanos Imperative storyline, But they're also set up in such a way that if you aren't very familiar with the books or the characters, you're still going to be able to follow it. You're still going to have an easy time knowing what's going on in the story and seeing where it's going. And as lead-ins to this big, epic storyline, I think the storyline looks like it's going to be pretty good this summer. And because it's in the Marvel Space books, most people are never going to pay attention to it. So if you want a really well-written, well-thought-out epic story, then these are your beginning chapters into what's going to be happening this summer there. Let's see here. Finally, let's talk about The Tick. Now, amazingly enough, The Tick has come back into print with a brand new series, and I don't see anybody talking about it. I don't see anybody pushing it. I don't hear anybody discussing it. And for those of you who saw the TV show and you know what The Tick is about, or you saw the cartoon show and you know what The Tick is about, but you've never read a Tick comic before, then go out and pick these up. Now, for one thing, they're in full color. They're beautiful to look at. And they have that zany Tick action, that zany Tick storyline, the zany Tick dialogue. I mean, it's just nothing but pure joy and happiness every time I pick up an issue of this and I'm reading through it. It's like classic stories from when I was in school, when Tick was big, when I got into high school. And it's just one of those things that you're just going to love. You're not going to be disappointed if you're picking up the new Tick series. So I want to throw that out there to everybody. A lot of people just seem like they don't even know it's out there. A lot of people seem to not even know who the Tick is. If you don't know who the Tick is, then you owe it to yourself to go out and pick up some of these. Because you're going to find yourself smiling and laughing out loud for real at these comic stories. Alright guys, that's going to do it today for the remainder. I want to thank you for watching. And don't forget, you got a couple extra bucks in your pocket. Don't save it like Ben Franklin said. Spend it on a comic you haven't read yet.